Okay, welcome to the afternoon after lunch sessions. We have two speakers in this particular session. The first one will be Palma Polyak from the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Societies in Cologne, another political scientist who will be talking about green industrial policy, multi-level governance, low road and high road strategies in Europe's battery rollout. So talking about some of the politics of that in terms of Europe. And then we will have Margarita Obolensky from Northwestern, who's going to be also talking about green stuff, but in a different sense. But these papers have in common that they are talking at some level about multi-level dynamics. Margarita will be talking about crop insurance, but at state level, things like that. So with that, I will give it to Palma. And as you've seen, the actual proper moderatorship time is done better, not by the moderators, but by Gabriella in the back.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the organizers, and thanks for having me. This really has been such an inspiring exchange. Now, the starting point of my work is that Europe is playing catch-up with China in battery manufacturing. At this point, actually, decarbonization, if that was our only goal, it would be both faster and cheaper if we imported batteries from China, because the installed cell manufacturing capacity looks like that chart over there. China is close to 3,000 gigawatt hours per year capacity, and Europe and the US is hovering around 200, trying to scale up to above 1,000 in the next 5 years. But really, there's a lot of talk about the global battery race in cell manufacturing. It's not a race, it's a blowout victory for China at this point, as you see. But Europe does not want to import batteries for 3 reasons. EU officials say that Chinese production standards do not meet our environmental ambition. We are, of course, concerned about losing our automotive industrial base, the backbone of manufacturing employment, famously. And we also want a piece of this high-growth industry. And finally, there are also geopolitical concerns about import dependence. So this is one of the sectors where Europe switched to a more active industrial policy, very unlike the European Union, actually, doing away with state aid restrictions and setting a target for domestic manufacturing capacity. But here comes the twist. The country that emerged as a champion of this EU-level commitment is Hungary, usually the spoiler of EU-level commitments, certainly when it comes to human rights and democracy. But in manufacturing batteries, Hungary did become a superpower. Korean and Chinese FDI has been flocking to the country. Currently, Hungary supports 1/4 of operational capacity in the EU and has the largest project pipeline. Now, these investments are heavily contested locally because of their devastating ecological impacts, first and foremost, from air and water pollution through the destruction of farmlands to excess water use in desertifying areas. And critics on the economic side also don't really buy that this will be such a growth engine. These are low value-added assembly line jobs. And yes, they are jobs, but the quality of these jobs in exchange for a lot of subsidy money seems very low. And the most bizarre part is that the EU wants to achieve strategic autonomy, so decrease geopolitical dependence, by relying on Chinese-owned factories fueled by Russian fossil fuels concentrated in an autocratic member states. So clearly there is a disconnect here that I wanted to look into. And meanwhile, what is also happening is that more high-road, more ambitious strategies are faltering in Europe. You probably heard about the Northvolt bankruptcy in late 2024. So much promise going up in smoke. Even though they did aim for a more ambitious pathway with 100% renewables powered production, lower water use, they have a colder climate, so they need less water for cooling. So a smaller ecological footprint. And the plan was domestic ownership and higher domestic value capture. But what happened was that the project collapsed. The main buyer actually pivoted to Samsung, producing in Hungary. It's not the end of the story, by the way, for Northvolt. Lighten, a US firm, acquired the Northvolt assets a couple of months ago. It's still uncertain how that story is going to go, but It's not the end of it for sure. But in general, what we see as a pattern is that these domestic battery startups in Europe have a really hard time scaling up, go through this valley of death phase. There are also other domestic projects who canceled their plans or downsized them. And this is what prompted me to look at the rollout of the industry across the European Union, so zooming out from the Hungarian case, which I have been following the most closely, and ask why is it so difficult to keep green manufacturing rollout on a more ambitious, more high road level. And I built a data set of the EU cell manufacturing projects. I monitor very closely their status, their fiscal support that they receive, and I also do a risk assessment about these projects. And I also did 5 case studies into all the member states who have operational cell manufacturing capacities as of 2024. These are Poland, Hungary, Germany, France, and Sweden. And turning to the literature, one of the reasons, of course, for the low road is that we are trying to achieve multiple goals here, right? So the compromise is logical. If you think green industrial policy, just the phrase, if something is green and industrial, it already implies a compromise or a bargain, as Niels Kupczok and Jonas Stam put it. And the political economy literature reflects on that. The story is that we cannot pass climate policy. The political coalition is not large enough, so we enlarge the political coalition with factions of industry, the decarbonizable sectors, as Niels was saying, and with geopolitical hawks, so who are concerned about the geoeconomic race with China. And this is exactly what happened in the EU as well. These motivations really gave a boost to this clean tech rollout and industrial policy in general. But then again, what happens if these aims come to conflict? Who sets the priorities? What are these priorities? And who imposes coherence? I find that the EU level actually cannot impose coherence, and that will explain the pattern that I started out with. Because the way to do that would be either through subsidies or regulations, so sticks, carrots or sticks, and Brussels is constrained in both. In subsidies, the EU industrial policy turn mostly meant relaxing member state level state aid restrictions, which were really strict to protect the level playing field in the EU. Relaxed those, but those were on the member state level. And the EU itself still only has a budget that amounts to about 1% of its GDP. And when it comes to the regulatory side, regulatory power is something that the EU does have in abundance, but we know from important research by Daniel Kellerman and Tommaso Pavone that there is an enforcement crisis in the European Union. The European Commission, so the main executive, has a decreasing political willingness to enforce common standards. The way they would do that, first of all, they rely on member states to monitor and enforce. But the way to actually enforce EU standards would be taking member states to court. And what we see in the data is that the number of these court cases, these infringement procedures, plummeted in recent years. So it's a problem with the enforcement of standards. Yeah.
Is there also a problem of over-regulation in the EU that complicates matters?
I'm very skeptical with this like over-regulation when it comes to a sector that produces these outcomes. I mean, I wouldn't say that this is a problem in this particular case.
So I'm always a little confused by this language of low road and high road. And it seems to me that the high road is asking for things that are, not privately optimal from the perspective of the firms. You want them to pay higher wages. You want them to invest in, reducing emissions. So is it a puzzle that we don't have high road, or is the puzzle just that the government isn't willing to pay enough subsidies to keep that going in perpetuity?
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's what I'm getting at as I get to the analytical framework that I tried to build up. There are very clear conflicts here, both between these goals, both within these goals, both across the member states. My point here is that there is no level on the EU level or Brussels level that can impose coherence or solve these conflicts. So what's happening is that these trade-offs are not resolved at the center. They are displaced onto member states and onto firms, as you were rightly saying, who will follow their own incentives, and the low road is a logical outcome of that. But we are talking about a multi-level polity that is known for being the regulator juggernaut. So why can't the EU really not? If the EU cannot do this, then really can anyone? So that's I think there's still a puzzle here. But yeah, you're onto something. But first, so what exactly are these trade-offs that need to be governed? And the easiest way to capture that is through a trilemma. We like trilemmas, the Roderick fan base in this room especially. So from climate neutrality, industrial competitiveness, and strategic autonomy, so the three aims, you can really only achieve two at best. At this point, it's close to impossible to do clean tech expansion without China, with that level of technological dominance in China, and still remain competitive. Or if we want to reduce dependence on China and remain competitive, then walking back on the green goals seems necessary, and so on. But I think the trilemma is still an oversimplification because there are trade-offs not only between these policy goals, but also within these policy goals, because these are not singular aims. These are clusters of sub-goals, and they contain these nested trade-offs that multiply as we try to operationalize these goals. And instead of a triangle, I think we're closer to a fractal geometry of compromises here. Now, what are the nested trade-offs? In climate, there seems to be a trade-off between fast rollout of clean tech and ecological integrity. It is linked to the well-known tension between climate justice and environmental justice that is theorized by extractivism scholars like Thierry Francos. Green electromobility creates sacrifice zones, lithium mines in Latin America, cobalt mines in Central Africa. I have a paper on lithium mining in Serbia with similar dynamics. And I find that it's not only on the extractive frontier, but also in this clean tech manufacturing that we see this dynamic. Now, in industry, it's also a very difficult trade-off. We have a late development dilemma, basically, at our hand, very similar to the one that East Asia faced. Now in reverse, the tables have turned. The question is, do we want jobs and output now? Because the fastest way to get those jobs, get those output, is to do via FDI, and FDI without strings attached, really. But in a single market, this can actually undermine this fostering of domestic champions that the EU also wants to do. And it also undermines higher value capture later on. In strategic autonomy, this is the vaguest of all the goals. There is this interesting trade-off. Europe can secure less remote producers, so basically hedging against the shipping crisis in the Suez Canal, but these will then be Chinese-owned. So if there's a geopolitical fallout with China, we're not much better off. And a big picture here is that the literature talks about a geopolitical turn in Europe. I actually see the opposite. In Europe, many important players, including Germany and Germany's mighty firms, are singularly inattentive to these geopolitical concerns, and really just do not subscribe to this point of view that that we need to care about this deeper conceptualization of geopolitical risk at all. So yeah, this is what I call the high road and the low road, a minimalist path or a maximalist path. And there are risks to both. Of course, if we go the minimalist approach, then we run the risk of subverting these aims, so like not achieving any at the end, or even undermining them. And of course, if we want to go the more ambitious path, that there's a huge viability risk. We saw it with Northvolt, commercial viability, huge fiscal costs, and yeah, so both very risky. Now, how can we assess what the member states are doing? First, without the numbers, just an overview. For the 5 countries that have operational capacities now. I talked about Hungary already, the clearest case of the minimalist path. Poland similarly pursues a minimalist path, also, although less extreme. Poland has the dirtiest power grid, not only in the EU, but among the dirtiest in the world. It's actually more high emission than that of China, which is ironic, given the fact that one of the reasons the EU wants to CBAM away Chinese imports is that they don't meet our environmental standards. But what are our standards exactly here? And in terms of value capture, it is also an FDI-based model. The innovation spillovers, I think, are not as hopeless as in Hungary's case, because Poland is a larger country, it has a deeper domestic ecosystem, so spillovers can happen. And in strategic autonomy, actually, Poland is very different from Hungary. It is one of the most hawkish EU member states, aligned more with the EU, with the US security posture. But still, they don't have domestic capacity, would be the ultimate shield geopolitically. Now, Germany is a very interesting mixed case, I would say. The rollout is slow, and the Chinese firm CATL is anchoring it. Germany also has a power sector. There is high emission still. But Germany also has domestic players, PowerCo of Volkswagen in cell manufacturing, but also smaller firms. If we have just a region that is there's just a high-tech manufacturing region in Germany, then of course these hopes that these innovation spillovers from this FDI can happen are of course much larger. And in terms of autonomy, Germany has some hedging with domestic capacity, but Germany is also very clearly exposed not only to China, but inputs concentrated in Hungary, actually, which I would also categorize as a geopolitical risk. Viktor Orbán has a demonstrated propensity to use any leverage for blackmail. So, you know, that much concentration doesn't seem very smart. And then we have France. France is, in fact, the only case of a consistent developmentalist, domestic champion-based strategy. Surprising exactly nobody, by the way, that the French prioritize batteries made in France and very willing to invest a lot in it. They are open to FDI, but they are also the only case where we have an explicit technology transfer in exchange for a subsidy deal. So they were the only one who tried to navigate this dilemma in this way. They also have a cleaner power sector in terms of emission, nuclear space. And their domestic champions, as opposed to Northvolt, are still standing. We also see geopolitical hedging in the French case. Chinese FDI is present, but it is balanced out. We see a Taiwanese firm and of course the domestic players. And then we have Sweden, which I term a defunct maximalist. So big ambitions, but defunct with Northvolt's collapse. So all in all, in the numbers, we see that minimalist paths are dominant, and even more so if we look at who has more capacity. These are the operational gigafactories as of 2024. And yeah, these are foreign headquarters, except for the French. Now, looking at the capacities planned by 2030, again, the investment pipeline is FDI-based. What you see there with the colors is the headquarters. And yeah, so we've got domestic capacities, the dark blue one in France and to a lesser extent in Germany. And you see that Chinese projects are also heavily present. So I think this is the big transatlantic divide, that the US has this political effort to keep Chinese FDI out. Europe does not subscribe to this point of view, and it is not just Hungary. The broader stance is shared by Germany, by Spain, by Portugal. Yes. What is important to mention, though, is that these projects are very volatile. They are getting announced, they break ground, they even start producing, but then they also get downsized or canceled in some cases. And as I said in the beginning, I assessed the risk profile of these projects, and what I find that the projects that are canceled are overwhelmingly domestic, and the projects that are online already are overwhelmingly foreign. So more domestic, the riskier. It is an infant industry, so no wonder. What I also find as a pattern is that project viability is very strongly linked to fiscal support. I would be even brave enough to say that this is causal, simply because the companies themselves often say that we canceled this project because we did not have a subsidy deal. So it's important. And yeah, the high-risk projects have lower fiscal support. Not only fiscal support, but uptake guarantees are really important. Does the project have anchor contracts, so these long-term purchase agreements with automotive firms? And the pattern I find here is that Europe's battery champions that are still standing, there are 3 of them, Verkor, ACC, and PowerCo, they're all linked to car makers, Renault, the ACC, Peugeot Group, and then Volkswagen, respectively. And what connects these car makers is that all of them have not only strong state ties, but state ownership. So it just allows for a more patient investment strategy, I think. Of course, there are 3 cases, so it's just a hint at this point. But I just really don't see, Renault, where the state has a 15% stake, saying to Verkor, the local battery champion, that no, we pivot to China instead, because this is exactly what happened with BMW, who did abandon Northvolt, which sealed the fate of that factory, of that company. So yeah, I said fiscal support is crucial. So let's see how much subsidies do these projects receive. One takeaway is that there's a lot of subsidy money flowing into not only domestic but foreign projects, and tech transfer requirements only appear in France. France, by the way, is the largest nominal spender, even though EU budget disciplinarians are breathing down their necks. So this variance is not really explained by either fiscal space or core periphery status. This is more strategy and ideology that we see here. And I think there's a really interesting question here that came up multiple times yesterday too. Are these subsidies actually needed for these projects to happen and to take off? So for the domestic project, as I was arguing, they do seem necessary so that they make it through this valley of death and scale up. But for foreign firms, I'm much more skeptical. So it rather seems like a subsidy race between the member states. And yeah, you also see Hungary, a class of its own as a proportion of GDP. So if someone is wondering why all these gigafactory projects flock to Hungary, that is one of the main reasons. So yeah, summing up, there is a systematic bias towards low-road strategies. There are more ambitious pathways. They do exist, but they do face commercial and execution challenges. They're really daunting, especially because they are undermined by generously subsidized foreign competitors within the same single market. So the low road is really the logical outcome of that. And for the minimalist pathways, they do speed up the rollout, but they also involve risks and exploitative practices as well. And finally, I wanted to draw up some policy implications because, as I said, the EU is a multi-level polity which could overcome a lot of these problems and actually force the rollout onto a more ambitious pathway. What the EU would need to do that is to regulate the life cycle carbon thresholds of these batteries. It could even do more and regulate ecological stress more broadly. And of course, enforcing existing EU laws would already go a long way. The development trade-off is more difficult, but there as well, I mean, an important step would be to stop subsidizing both the domestic or European champions and their foreign competitors within the same single market. That's very clearly incoherent. So like an EU level subsidy governance would be better in this case. And in geopolitics, neither these US-style blanket China bans nor unconditional openness seems the optimal path, but China really showed the way with being open to FDI while also enforcing tech transfer requirements. And yes, what is interesting is that the political will at this point is missing clearly from the EU level. Of course, this can be explained by the entanglement of a key industry and the sheer urgency of this rollout. But I think what could bring a change of course is that if France or the Nordics, who do strive for more ambitious pathways, they would say, hey, that actually hurts our interests. We are not at this point yet. And this is what I wanted to finish with. Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks a lot, Palma. The question I had was, you have these 5 countries and they've chosen different sort of strategies, minimalist to maximalist. Is the problem, you point to the problem being sort of how much patient capital you have versus the projects that failed, Northvolt being this horrendous example. 8 years of policy support from the European Investment Bank, foreign banks, just everybody, the good and great, tried to support a European battery champion, and it fails. And the story that you say is, well, they didn't have a patient capital, and they didn't have a domestic off-taker. Is that the story that, like, what is your analysis of what went wrong with Northvolt? Because my understanding is the failure of Northvolt is sending a chilling effect on all battery investments in Europe. That's at least how it's being interpreted on the industry side. That if Europe tried to give a huge amount of support to one battery champion and that fails, then there's no hope for other things. But what you're presenting is a much more complicated picture. So I really want to understand what your analysis of what went wrong with Northvolt.
Do we collect or do I? So it is a very complicated story, and I'm not directly analyzing why Northvolt went bust. Actually, I'm more looking at the outcomes and see is it high road, is it low road? My understanding of the case is that they just scaled up too fast. This is also what the French are saying, that we're not going to try not to repeat this mistake. But when it comes to the patient capital, it really, what sealed the fate of that company was, of course, the buyers. BMW is one of the largest ones, simply saying, yeah, we have alternatives, we can just pivot to them. And why I see, a more optimistic future for Verkor, the French startup, I just don't see that happening in the French case. Now, is it good or bad? That's a different question. It can be that this is just throwing good money after bad, but I think this patient capital story here does make a difference. But when it comes to the individual projects' fate, that is a complicated story.
Palma, I just wanted to understand better your second bullet point here about development, where it says stop subsidizing both champions in the foreign, meaning only subsidize national champions or only subsidize champions. That seems, given like the experience of Northvolt, it seems sort of channeling subsidies a little bit too much. No?
Yeah, what I'm pointing out here is that if we try to nurture this infant industry and want a domestic battery industry in Europe, then being in the same single market with these generously subsidized Chinese companies is just incoherent. So again, either choose one or the other. Either give up on the infant industry path, but doing the two together is incoherent. And as I said, I'm also skeptical with the need to give these Chinese companies subsidies in the first place, because these Chinese companies actually want to go to Europe. They are facing a very cutthroat competition at home and low profit margins. So it really seems to be that what EU member states are doing at this point is a subsidy race. They want to grab this investment and so that they come to like one specific member state. But from a broader European perspective, this seems to be suboptimal.
Reflect a little bit on the US in this context, because there seem to be parallels here with the Midwestern unionized car battery manufacturing places that open up in the Midwest and Michigan, and then we have the Sunbelt industry states and not unionized, lower pay. And I wondered if there are any lessons to be learned here, or is this just kind of a deterministic story? The high road will fail, and unless France pulls up something that nobody expects, or do we have to kind of accept that catching up and kind of getting industry on board just means compromising on like social and regulatory standards that are in place? That's just part of the bargain if we want to decarbonize.
One more question and answer, and then time. Okay, so
Yeah. So what exactly is the geopolitical risk for China? It's different than the simple diversification one. I mean, you don't want just one supplier. There are lots of suppliers. The political economy of Chinese industry, and especially of the battery industry, is such that there is no, I mean, they're not going to cut it off. Only reason the geopolitical risk arises is if they are not going to be pushed around. So what is the risk that Europe is concerned about? I don't see that. And this question of missing political will this missing political will totally disappear if the Ukraine war is stopped? Halts, finish? Or is it because I don't see a direct, any analysis of risk vis-a-vis China, I don't see the risk.
Thanks. Excellent questions. So if you leave it to the firms, then yes, this is a deterministic story of a low road strategies, as the first question alluded to. But there is such a thing as federal regulations in the US, certainly, and even in the EU. I mean, it's a possibility that you say, we want this industry, we want domestic champions, we want higher environmental ambitions, and we regulate our single market in a way that we uphold that and be consistent with our regulations. It is a possibility. I mean, the political climate in the US certainly does not seem very favorable for that. But the lesson, I believe, is that even though it is possible in a multi-level polity to do that, it's very difficult, because if you leave it to the states in the US case and the firms, then the low road is the outcome. And when it comes to the geopolitical risk, so my point was exactly that Europe is not concerned about geopolitical risk. I mean, there's a big difference with the United States, where across the political spectrum, not even the geopolitical risk, as I understand it, but more like the competition with China, and that's why these federal entities of concern regulations and No Goshen Act type of political initiatives arise in the US. In Europe, that's not the case. What we do see, though, in the French case is exactly as you were saying, some hedging is just because there can be, scenarios where there is a geopolitical fallout with China. Europe just went through quite an important lesson with its reliance on Russian gas there as well. The problem wasn't that Russian gas was far away. The problem was that Russian gas was concentrated in the hands of a hostile actor. If a fallout like that were to happen with China, say China invades Taiwan and Europe is prompted to respond with sanctions, then it would be really, really difficult to sanction China if we are that exposed to China. So, I mean, that does not mean that the right response to that is a blanket ban. It's as I said, just doesn't seem possible or desirable. But some hedging, some more hedging than for instance, what the German firms seem to do, seem desirable. And I mean, when it comes to the Ukraine war, I mean that's it's very difficult to say, but of course, I mean, the whole efforts to seize strategic minerals in Ukraine, of course, like very much play into this. Okay.
Why is China, the risk against China may disappear? That's what I'm asking.
No, I wouldn't say.